pretty basic topic, but I know there's a lot of magical paths and spiritual sort of pursuits and stuff like that that don't necessarily enforce the idea of a magical diary as much as certain other ones. I come from a background of studying Thelema, which is very firm about keeping a diary, keeping a journal of whatever practices you're doing, and that sort of thing. But I do know that even some other paths that are very similar may not enforce it as such. And then you get there's all kinds of other sort of things that people are into that I'm wholly ignorant of, and I don't know what people do. How many of us do keep a diary? Okay. So this is actually a worthwhile subject to be talking about regardless. So keeping a diary is one of the most important tools for a serious practitioner of magic and a serious student of spiritual studies. How can you tell if a ritual had the desired effects? How can you tell you're doing your meditation exercises correctly? How can you gauge your progress? Without the record, how can you look back at where you were months or years prior and see clearly what progress you've made and where you're heading? These are all important reasons for keeping a diary. Crowley talks about the diary in such terms as to make it clear that a person is the result of countless causes and effects and is propelled through life by the combined momentum of these. So the diary functions as a means of discovering and clearly defining your course in life and your spiritual development. In this light, it acts as a sort of fundamental tool for navigation. If you get into the habit of keeping a clear, detailed diary over the years, you will find that, in addition to other things, you are developing a guidebook to yourself. Also, there's the matter of perspective. You may find yourself here and now experiencing a high point or a low point, maybe doing such practices that seem to be generating some great spiritual insights, or maybe feeling very bleak and sterile with no sense of purpose. Or maybe it just feels like business as usual, and it doesn't seem like anything special is happening. Maybe some really cool insight strikes you, but doesn't seem to take you anywhere past a certain point. Sometimes the best way to get further insight into these things is in hindsight, from the perspective of seeing things on the whole. Obviously, a diary kept carefully over time will provide this overall perspective. One of the things I want to go over today is Liber, which is one of the guidelines for basic course study in the AA system, which I'm not talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. When I talk about the AA, this is the AA is Crowley's system that he developed along with George Cecil Jones in 1906, and is essentially intended to lead each aspirant to their individual attainment for the betterment of humanity. So it's basically a system by which you can be doing meditation and magic practices, by which you learn and study and progress and attain for yourself. So in Liber, it's set into a series of parts here. So the first part, part one, is specifically about keeping a record. And it starts with, it is absolutely necessary that all experiments should be recorded in detail during or immediately after their performance. I like the term experiments. So if we're doing like magical ritual, if we're doing tarot readings, or if we're doing meditation exercises, thinking of it in terms of experiments is kind of a good mentality to have. We talk about having the method of science and the aim of religion. So we want to be thinking to some extent scientifically about what we're doing and keeping records of that. I don't really like the idea of thinking of magic in terms of doing like one ritual that you're expecting to have, all the results that you're planning on and that sort of thing, and then calling it a day and hinging everything on this one ritual. I like to think in terms of practice and constant, regular practice. And it's the same for meditation exercises. These things are cumulative, and the more you work at it, the better you get. It's like anything else. It's like playing an instrument. It's like driving a vehicle. It's like anything else. The more practice you get at it, the better you're going to be at it, and the more efficiently you're going to be doing it. It is highly important to note the physical and mental condition of the experimenter or experimenters. Why is this? if you're doing a magical ritual, it's obviously going to be whatever your state of mind is at the time is obviously going to come into play hugely on your results and how things come out. Going back to how you may be at this present state, if you're in a very spiritual mood, that may have strong effects, or if you're in a very bleak, sterile mood and you're sort of forcing yourself to go through the motions, that's going to have an effect. And these are things that you can learn from cumulatively as well, because of the fact that, like, if you're in a bleak state of mind, gradually over time you can train yourself to put yourself into a more enthusiastic state of mind as well. So, and these are things that you can learn how that works best for you, rather than having like a book that teaches you the tricks to doing that. You can train yourself what works for you. You can experiment with certain things and see what works, what doesn't, and concentrate on things that work more efficiently. Next up, it's also very important to be keeping an honest record in that light as well. So you don't want to be lying to yourself. You don't want to be too flowery in such a way that you're trying to be positive about things or overly optimistic about things. You want to be honest about where you're at and what the conditions are. The time and place of all experiments must be noted. Also the state of the weather, and generally all conditions which might conceivably have any result upon the experiment, either as adjuvants to or causes of the result, or as inhibiting it, or as sources of error. So in this case, the note I would give is just basically the more info you keep record of at first, the better. You may feel like, well, do I really have to keep track of things like what the weather's doing, or if X is going on, if I've had such and such to eat during the day, what my overall diet's been over the past week. If you keep track of more information, that's better initially from the outset, and gradually over time, you can whittle it down to what you find are the important contributing factors. So from the outset, it's kind of hard to know what those things are. You may not realize that the weather has any effect at all. I know for myself, gradually over time, I've seen that the weather is a hugely contributing factor for me, and that's something that's really handy to keep note of. Like for myself, whenever it's raining, for instance, if it's going to rain, I get a lot of tension, and I think it's the barometric pressure or something like that that affects my sinuses and whatnot, and that's a hugely contributing factor to whatever my results may be. If it's actually raining, I may have such and such results as a result of that. So now, let's see, where am I here? It says the AA will not take official notice of any experiments which are not thus properly recorded. So keep in mind, I mean, what constitutes like more spurious records? If you're not keeping clear records, think of it in terms of if you go back a few years down the road and you're looking at whatever you've been keeping track of, say astral journeys or just straight up meditation exercises or whatnot, and say you do have some great results and you discover this, whether at the time or even down the road, you look back and you're like, holy crap, I had like some really great insights there, or this such and such was such a key that later on manifested in some other way that now I understand how all these things tie together. But if you're not keeping a clear record of things, you may be at a loss to recreate those results or to understand them to the fullest. Also, you may, at a later date, read too deeply into whatever results you had at that time if you're not keeping a careful record of things. There's all kinds of possibilities of why this could be a problem for you. It is not necessary at this stage for us to declare fully the ultimate end of our researches, nor indeed would it be understood by those who have not become proficient in these elementary courses. Now, this is kind of interesting. So it's basically saying, to some effect, it's not really important what our goal is for all of this, what the exercises, especially the exercises put forth in the